Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Sara Allen, and today we are going to talk about verifying your genealogical tree with your DNA results. First of all, I'm going to define genealogical tree, even though I think most of you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the use of documents such as birth, marriage, and death records, obituaries, census records, courthouse records, and so forth to trace your ancestors and verify information about their lives. You might also use oral history, family information within your family, photographs, and so forth to document these ancestors' lives. And you can compile these results on a genealogical family tree, depending on how you want to present that information to your relatives, and this would contain the names of your ancestors. So the question is, can you verify those genealogical records and ancestor identification using your DNA results? And the answer is yes, in many cases. So this is my genealogical tree, and you are going to get really familiar with it, at least the first couple generations, because we're going to use my tree and my DNA results as the example. So these are people that I either knew personally or I have found genealogical records linking them to my family. I knew all four of my grandparents and, of course, my two parents, and I met one of my great-grandparents once or twice when I was young. So this is my genealogical tree. So what about my DNA? How are we going to combine the two? Well, you also have what I'm calling a genetic tree, and this is ancestors that you are actually genetically related to. And you can figure this out through your DNA results and through looking at your matches. You would also find it out by DNA testing yourself and other close family members. Many people that I know of try to test their parents, their grandparents, great-grandparents if they're still alive, aunts, uncles, great aunts, uncles, and so forth to try to get a fuller picture of the family through DNA. Adopted people, who may not have any information about the names of their biological family can often determine who their biological family was only by DNA results. So they kind of reverse engineer their family tree based on their DNA results. So there's a lot that can be done with DNA. It takes skills and practice, and especially using more distant matches to try to re-engineer who your family might have been. Now, sometimes your genealogical tree and your genetic tree may not agree with each other. So some of the people on your genealogical tree may not turn out to be biological ancestors of yours. And this would typically be for two reasons: a misattributed parentage situation, where someone's biological parents are not the persons named in a genealogical record, typically a family secret. Or another reason why some people in your genealogical tree may not be in your genetic tree would be if you haven't inherited measurable DNA from them. So basically, the autosomal DNA test, which we're going to talk about at length today, reaches back to about the 5th to the 8th great-grandparent level. So after that, you're still related to your 9th great-grandfather, but you may not have any of his DNA at all in your autosomal DNA because you just didn't inherit any. It's too far back in the tree. So he's still your 9th great-grandfather, but you may not be able to prove it by your DNA results. So just a word about the misattributed parentage situations. These could be for a variety of reasons. Genealogical records could name the parent, the supposed parent of a relative, but DNA testing reveals that another person was actually the biological parent. This could be from an unknown adoption, a stepfather who is shown as the father in records, but he's really not the biological father. Situations where the husband of the family is not the biological father of some of the children born during the marriage. Unmarried women who give their children their maiden name, making it seem like that's their father's name when it's not. Egg, sperm donor usage, and that has sometimes been kept a secret from the child who was conceived using those methods, or just maybe an error in your genealogical record keeping. Okay, so with your DNA research, like I said, today we're going to talk about autosomal DNA testing. And this provides you with a list of DNA relative matches from both your mother's side and your father's side. You can use these matches to confirm or disprove your genealogical research. The autosomal testing companies include Ancestry DNA, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage DNA, and 23andMe. And you can use a combination of one or more of those companies' results to work on your research in this way. Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA could also be useful in some circumstances, but we're not covering that in the lecture today at all. So basically, when you have a relative, like a close relative, who tests at the same DNA testing site as you have tested at, you will share a predictable amount of DNA. There's a range of DNA amounts that you would share with a sibling or a half sibling or an aunt or an uncle or a first cousin. And for some degrees, the lesser relationships as well. It gets more difficult to discern when you get down to like the third cousin level, because there's a lot of relationships that share around the same amount of DNA. But with these closer relatives, you absolutely should be able to tell if that person is related to you the way you think that they should be related to you by the amount of DNA that you share with them. So this is just an example. These examples today are mostly going to be from Ancestry DNA. We're going to have a couple from Family Tree DNA's Family Finder test, but the DNA companies mostly use the same general layout. So this layout here is the match page from Ancestry DNA, and the match pages at the other companies will look similar. These are some of my closest matches over on the left-hand side of the screen. And then over on the right-hand side of the screen are some very distant matches where I only share 10 centimorgans of DNA with those people. And even though the company is suggesting that we might be half second cousin 3 times removed, it's more likely that we're a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th cousin really far back on the line for those people on the right-hand side of the screen. People on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see here, it's telling us in the middle here, under the possible relationship, it tells us how much DNA is shared. That CM is an abbreviation for centimorgan, and that is the unit of measurement for DNA. So I had covered up the names of the matches on that match page back there to protect their privacy. But when you look at your own test results, you will be able to see the names of your matches. And so part of the trick of utilizing your DNA to learn things about your family tree is that you have to identify some of your matches, obviously. Like, who are they? Why are you relating to them? Some of them you will recognize. The first and last name may be that of a known relative. And so you can kind of piece together who that is, or you could ask around in the family. Do you know, John Higginbottom? And somebody says, yeah, he's a cousin over on this side of the family. Or maybe the last name is a name in your tree. So you kind of have that to go on, that maybe that's how they're related to you through that particular name. Maybe the DNA match has a profile on the testing site with some biographical information, maybe where they live, what their age is, and with that information, you can kind of Google them, or it jogs your memory about who they are. Sometimes you can view the DNA matches tree. I would say maybe 60 or 70% of the matches at Ancestry DNA have a tree that you can look at. It may not be a very large tree, it may not have a good information on it, but there may be a tree there to look at. And it has your ancestor's surname on it. So, or a place where you know that your family lived. And so you can kind of get an idea from that. Sometimes the DNA company will give you a hint about who the DNA match might be. They're called common ancestor hints at Ancestry, and I'll show one of those in a minute. You can always message or email with your matches to try to find out what their identity is. Be brief, be positive and upbeat, try to offer to share information with them. Those are always some good tips in trying to get them to reply to you. If you really want a reply, you might give them your phone number, your email address. And then you can always do more research on the person's name to try to figure out who they are by looking at People Finder websites and so forth. So again, as I said, the amount of DNA shared with a relative is measured in centimorgans, and for this match SR, I'm sharing 539 centimorgans with them. The more centimorgans you share with someone, the closer your genealogical relationship would be. And this is predictable. You can predict possible relationship with a match based on the amount of DNA shared. You can use the DNA company's relationship predictions, but use them with caution. They're usually multiple possible relationships. So the DNA company is saying that SR is my first cousin once removed. And I'm going to take that to mean that I share enough DNA for us to be first cousins once removed. But that may not necessarily be the correct relationship. There would be a number of possible relationships. So one way to get a list of possible relationships is to go to the DNA Painter website, and they have a tool called the Shared Centimorgan Project tool. It's a free tool to use, and this is the URL to find it at dnapainter.com tools/shared-cm-v4. So I'm going to show those results a couple times during this program. So here's somebody that I shared 847 centimorgans with. And so I entered 847 centimorgans in the box here. This is what the tool looks like. It will return for you a list of possible relationships. And it has a list of possible relationships that would occur 96% of the time. And those would be great grandparent, great aunt or uncle, half aunt, uncle, first cousin, and a couple more. These are all equally valid relationships. So you'd have to investigate each one to figure out which one it might be. And then 4% of the time, it could be one of these relationships down here, but it actually can't be these ones with the crosses because they basically said those are statistically almost impossible. So it's more likely that it's half first cousin or first cousin once removed down here, 4% of the time. So that's how you read this chart. And you want to read this whole screen here because it does provide you with more explanation about what you are looking at. Okay, I mentioned that some of the sites will give you a common ancestor hint. This is on your DNA match page. This is showing you a common ancestor hint for Ancestry, but MyHeritage DNA company also does this. And so look for those on their site. So here it says common ancestors. So I know that this guy who happens to be my Uncle B has a common ancestor to me, according to Ancestry. This means that they basically have found that we both have a tree, Uncle B and I have a tree on the Ancestry website, and we have the same ancestors listed in the tree. And we also have a DNA match because we're showing on each other's DNA match page. So with that, Ancestry suggests who the common ancestor is because Ancestry sees both of our trees. And so it's an AI computer generated hint here. And it can sometimes be wrong. But for an uncle, you know, either he's my uncle or he's not, I would know. So this is what it's showing up under the match page. It says, we think that according to Ancestry member trees, there are common ancestors that connect you and B. B could be your uncle through your maternal grandparents. And then they show me a little chart showing how it could possibly be true. And since I know Uncle B, I know that this is true. So you want to look out for those common ancestor hints, evaluate them, and just kind of go from there. Sometimes, like I said, they're wrong, and I'm not really going to get into that today about how to detect when they're wrong, but I might do a future program on that because I think that would be interesting. Okay, so now, after all of that, we're going to go into the actual program of how to prove your tree by your DNA results. So it's going to be a twofold process, and since we are using my tree, I wanted to show you some genealogical records so you can see how I compiled the genealogical part of my tree. And then we're going to look at DNA matches that either prove or disprove the genealogical records that I found. So you're either going to have direct DNA proof or indirect DNA proof of a relationship. With direct proof, you're actually testing that ancestor to make sure that you and that person share DNA correctly according to what relationship you would be. So if you tested your father and yourself, this would give you a result that either he's your father or he's not, because he'd show up on your DNA match list as your father or he wouldn't. That would be a direct proof of who your father is by DNA. An indirect proof would be that you test other family members related to your father and see how you relate to them. Testing your father's sibling, for instance, would show either that they are your aunt or uncle or not. Testing some of your dad's first cousins would show that either they're related to you or they're not, again. And you can also want to make sure that you check the range of CMs that you do share with these other relatives to make sure that it's within the right range for your relationship. Okay, so with that in mind, I hope this makes sense to all of you. So we're going to start with my tree, and we're just going to start with me, and we're going to continue on to my parents, and we're also going to do my grandparents today. We're going to touch on some of my great-grandparents, but we're not going to get all the way through them because we just don't have enough time. And I may take up this program and do like a part 2 later on where we get into like the second great-grandparents over here, because things will get a little hairier. It will not be as simple and as easy to determine who they are genealogically speaking through records, and it won't be as easy to determine who they are through DNA. But we're starting with me, and we're just going to go logically through this. Basically, I included this slide because some people today are having to produce documents to prove their identity more and more. There are different, government entities that want us to go and prove our identity to them. If you're trying to get your real ID, for instance, which is coming up at the beginning of May, and so forth. So I just was going to give you a list of possible other documents. I don't know if any of these would be necessarily accepted by the real ID people, but these are other documents that document your birth. So of course, there's the birth certificate. Most of us today have a birth certificate that was issued at the time of our birth, but some of our parents and grandparents did not. And so some 80 and 90-year-old people that are still living today do not have a birth certificate that was issued when they were born. So they have to come up with some other alternative pieces of documentation if they're asked to prove their identity. There was a birth announcement in the newspaper for my birth, so that would be a way to just have another piece of documentation of my birth. Census records showing your family together, photographs of you in the hospital or with parents as a newborn, oral history from other family members, if you have family members alive that remember your birth. A baby book. Now, I'm dating myself. Now, I don't think everybody has a baby book nowadays, but back in the time period that I was born, it was a big deal. My mother wrote in it every year, and she updated it with pictures of me at different milestones, and it has a lot of cool information about my early years. Church christening or baptismal record. And I have heard that school records are sometimes used as an official document of your parentage or of your date of birth for people that don't have a birth certificate. So school records might be able to be used as well. Okay, I'm not going to show you my birth certificate. So we are just going to take my word for it that I have a birth certificate and it gives the names of my parents on it. We have established my identity with documents. Now, how can we prove my parentage with DNA? Well, directly, remember there's directly and indirectly. Directly, if you're able to test your parents, you should test them. So myself and my parents have all taken DNA tests at 4 different autosomal DNA testing companies. These are my parents, Don and Anita, in Colorado a number of years ago. So we did all take DNA tests. And so will they come back as my parents as, they should? Well, if you do get that result, it should say parent-child or something of that sort for a parental or child relationship, because there's a couple weird exceptions, but basically there's really not a lot of other possibilities. They're sharing enough DNA with you to either be your parent or your child. So this is Ancestry DNA. This is what it looks like to have a parent-child match. And Ancestry, I think I might have changed the label to say father and mother, but they might have done it also because they can see our gender. And so they would know that DA would have to be my father and AA would have to be my mother. And you can see we share around 3,400 centimorgans of DNA, and it's 50%, which is exactly what it should be. You can't share more than 50% with one parent. It's 50-50. So I have the direct DNA match to my parents, but many of you may not have that. You may not be able to test your parents for a number of reasons. So you're going to have to try to prove your parentage indirectly by DNA if you choose to, do this exercise with me. Using matches to perhaps siblings, aunts and uncles, grandparents, first cousins, and so forth. And then extrapolating that these are your parents or not based on those other results. Siblings, I just put in here that you might want to collect genealogical records about all your siblings too, if you're the family genealogist. And so you would do the same process that you would do for yourself and just get the siblings' birth certificate and birth announcements and family photographs and so on. One of the big surprises that people get when they do DNA testing is finding out that some of their siblings are not full siblings as they were told. So I'm going to show you a full sibling match at Ancestry DNA. So full siblings should share in the range of 2,300 to 3,900 cms, with the average around 2,600 cms. And this is my dad and his sister. So dad and his sister are full siblings. They share 2,600 cms, and this is at Ancestry. And Ancestry DNA is the only company that will do this, I believe. They can tell you if someone is a full sibling or not, and it will be up here above the name. So you can see MJ Allen, the name there, and then over here above that is the word full sibling. You can also tell this by the CMs, like I said. So 2,600 CMs is not a half sibling, it's a full one. And so they were expected to be full siblings, so this is not a surprise to us, but it does confirm that they are. And I should say that this does not confirm the identity of the two parents that they share, but it does confirm that they are full siblings and share the same two parents. Now, let's say that you thought that AA and VB were full siblings. This is telling you that they are not full siblings. So you can see that half siblings will share in the range of about 1,300 to 2,300 centimorgans, with an average of about 1,800 centimorgans. So this person, VB, is showing up as 1,776 centimorgans, or 25% shared DNA. And so this makes them half siblings. They just cannot be full siblings, unfortunately. So you kind of want to check. This is what I was saying about checking the relationships with known family members to make sure they have the correct number of centimorgans or not. So if we go over to DNA Painter and just double check this, 1,776 centimorgans, we enter it in and we get the explanation that basically it's 100% has to be a half sibling or one of these other relationships, grandparent, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, grandchild. 0% of the time can it be a full sibling. And then if you want to figure out which parent they share, you would look at the shared matches. And there's a whole process to doing that. But basically, they should only match either the mother's side of the family or the father's side of the family. And so you should be able to tell which side that is through the shared matches. Okay, so grandparent relationships, again, you can start searching for your parents' birth certificates and death certificates, your parents' birth announcement, your parents' church records, and so forth to get the genealogical information about who on paper your grandparents were. So we're going to start doing this with my parents. We're going to look and see who Donald's parents were first and then Anita. So this would be my paternal side. My paternal grandparents on paper are David and Fanny. So we do have a census putting my dad into a family unit with David and Fanny. This is the 1940 census. My dad would be 8 years old. They're in Lawrence County, Indiana. And this census does give relationships to head of household. So you've got head, wife, daughter, and son. And there's Joanne, my dad's sister, who he has the DNA match to. Okay, so that's David and Fanny, the purported parents of my dad, and these are the grandparents that I knew growing up. Here's my grandpa David, and we have, these are just some records that I slapped together from basically Ancestry.com or other online sites. So you'd want to do more genealogical research than what I'm doing here. This is just, you know, a few examples for you. You'd want to get, for instance, the actual obituary. What I'm showing you is an abstract of the obituary. So this is an abstract of David's obituary. It basically reiterates that this is the same family. They're still in Bedford, Indiana. His wife, his widow is Fanny, and his children are Don and Joanne down at the very bottom there. So that's the family from the 1940 census. And then this is Fanny's, my grandmother's, death certificate. And I don't show the whole thing, but you can see here the informant for the information on the death certificate is Don Allen. And it says, what is his relationship to Fanny? He is a son. So again, this verifies that Fanny and Donald are mother and son according to the genealogy records. What about the DNA? We're getting to the point where we don't have direct DNA tests. I don't have a direct DNA test that my grandfather, David Allen, took. So I can't say directly that he's my grandfather by DNA. I'm going to have to do it indirectly by testing other family members. And I have a great aunt. So this would be David's sister. We're calling her Aunt C. So Aunt C has taken a DNA test. This is the Family Tree DNA testing company. And you can see the number of centimorgans over there on the side, 1899 centimorgans. And this is her sharing with my dad. So this is Aunt C's kit compared to my dad's kit. And she would be my dad's aunt, right? Because she's his father's sister. And it says she could be an uncle or aunt. That is the correct relationship. But we can toss this into DNA Painter again. So this is 1899 centimorgans. And you can put that in DNA Painter, 1899, and it says it's 100% aunt, uncle, half sibling, grandparent, child, and niece or nephew. So this means full aunt or uncle. It does not mean half. A full aunt will share approximately 1,300 to 2,300 centimorgans, and a half aunt would share approximately 575 to 1,300. So if Aunt C had come up and shared only 700 centimorgans with my dad, that would mean she'd be a surprise half aunt. And we'd have to figure out how she and my grandfather would have been half siblings. We'd look at the shared matches, and we'd figure out which parent they were sharing and which parent they were not sharing. And typically it would be that they would be sharing a mother and different fathers. And then we'd have to figure out whether Aunt C had a different father or my grandfather had a different father. And so this could go down a whole rabbit hole. But that would be a red flag if you were low sharing like that with somebody that was supposed to be your aunt. And obviously, you know, this would indicate a half aunt. Okay. Basically, we did prove, I should go back and just say, we did prove that David and Aunt C are full siblings. And so we don't know exactly who their parents are yet, but we're going to get there. So proving Fanny Caesar is my paternal grandmother by DNA. So this is my dad's mother, Fanny. And Fanny did not take a DNA test either. So we're going to look at indirect ways of proving that she is my grandmother. None of her siblings took a DNA test either, so I don't have that more direct comparison. So I'm going to have to go to different lesser relatives. And so I'm going to skip over Fanny right now, and we're going to come back to her when we get to the great-grandparent level, because we're going to have to go farther up the tree. Okay, now we're going to move on to my maternal side and look at my mother's parents. So who are my mother's parents? How can we find out who they are? We have on paper that they are Robert and Helen, and I grew up knowing them as my grandparents. So here we have the first census that my mom appears in. This is the 1950 census. You can see again, we have relationships to head of household. We have head, wife, daughter, and there's my mom at age 8, Anita Mitchell. And they are living in, I didn't put this on the screen, they're living in Hillsdale County, Michigan, which is where they should be. And we have the named parents, Robert and Helen. Then we have an abstract of a marriage announcement, and that's my mom there. We're seeing a little snippet of the article. This is my mom on the right there with a very long veil. That would have been a wedding announcement that was put in the paper when she got married to my dad. And it says that she is the daughter of Robert Mitchell. So again, that's the same father that we had for her. This is my grandfather, Robert, in the picture there. And then Helen Willison would be my grandmother. That's my grandma there, Helen. And this is again an abstract of her obituary. And very, very small lettering down at the bottom, it says who her children were, and Anita Allen is one of them right at the very bottom there. Sorry, that's not bigger, but you have to take my word for it. It also tells us that her maiden name is Willison, so we can have that information as well. Now, how do we prove this by DNA? So again, Robert Mitchell, my maternal grandfather, did not take a DNA test. He died before DNA testing was a thing, and no close family members of his family have taken a DNA test either. This is a very small family. It's also a low testing family. And so we just don't have anybody that has taken a test, and there's nobody for me to ask. So we're going to have to climb up the tree several rungs before we get to some DNA matches to Robert's family. And so you might be tempted to say, well, maybe Robert's not really your grandfather. Well, you have to keep climbing the rungs of the tree and make sure before you jump to that conclusion. So we do have matches to more distant relatives, and I will show those in the next segment. Now, Helen died in 2014, and so she was alive during the age of DNA testing, and we actually got her DNA tested. So I have a direct DNA result between me and my grandmother. So the expected amount of DNA shared with a grandparent is around 1,800 centimorgans. And you can see that I share 1,899 with her. This is Grandma Helen here, and this is in comparison with me. So I do have direct DNA proof that Helen is my grandmother, and by extension, the mother of Anita, my mother. When we go back to our chart here, we can say that we have proved that Donald is my dad because we DNA tested him directly. We proved Anita was my mom because we DNA tested her directly. And we know that Helen is my grandmother because we DNA tested her directly. These others, we have some pretty good, well, we have a good match to David's sister. So we're well on our way to proving that David is my grandfather. Fanny and Robert, we still have more work to do because we didn't have good DNA matches to their sides of the family yet. So we are now going to move on to these great grandparents here, and we're going to try to connect my grandparents to their parents, who are David's parents, who are Fanny's parents, who are Robert's parents, who are Helen's parents. So again, this is the same stuff, just, collecting information, birth, marriage, and death records, and so forth about your grandparents. This is for your genealogical records. Okay, so as far as who are the parents of my grandpa, David Allen? So you can see down here that we're on my dad's side, we've got his father, David, and we've got his parents are supposedly David and Alice Brown down at the bottom of the screen here on the family tree. So we do have Grandpa David in the census in 1920. This is in Lawrence County, Indiana. He's with wife Alice and a bunch of kids, and he has a son, David, too. So there's David Jr. and David Sr. And these are the parents that I have for my grandfather. So this all jives up with my family information that I had. Found the same family in the census. Okay, when my grandfather got married to my grandmother, he had to give his parents' names on his marriage license. And again, this is an abstract of that. They're getting married in Bedford, and he gives his parents' names as David and Alice Brown, and his intended spouse as Fanny Caesar. And this is a picture of all of them, my grandpa and his parents, David and Alice. So what about DNA? If you'll recall, we already had our match with Sister C, and she was David's sister, right? And she's matching the correct amount of DNA with my dad to be an aunt, a full aunt, and with me to be a great aunt. And so we have determined that Sister C and my grandfather are full siblings. And since in the census and other genealogical records, they say their parents are David and Alice, this is probably correct. We also have, and this is where we have extended family members that have tested, another match that we found on Ancestry to my grandpa's sister Helen's grandson, whose name is Sam. Now, I knew my great aunt Helen. She's a person that is known to me, and I knew her children. So I knew LD. I don't know the grandchildren and great grandchildren personally. They live in another state, but I have heard of these people and this family. So I have no reason to doubt that this is a correct connection. And you could throw the 38 centimorgans into the DNA Painter website just to make sure that a second cousin once removed should share that amount of DNA with me. But based on, again, like I said, Sister C's DNA results, we have pretty much proved that my grandfather is David Allen, and he was the father of Don, my dad, and that they're full siblings. And so Helen's DNA results are helpful, but they're not the linchpin of this argument. David and Alice are most likely the parents of these three children, and therefore we have identified that David's parents are this couple by DNA. All right, now I mentioned to you that Fanny was a little more difficult because there hadn't been a lot of people DNA testing, but this is Fanny in genealogical records with her parents in the 1910 census. This family is in Chicago, which is right where they're supposed to be. And it's Joseph, Mary, and then their children who are also named Joseph and Mary. And then there's Fanny, who's called Frances there, and that was her full name on her birth certificate. And you can see that these are my dad's mother's parents, so my dad's maternal grandparents. We can also see that when Fanny applied for a marriage license to marry my grandfather, she named her parents as Joseph, Caesar, and Mary. And the last name is a little bit butchered here, but I think on the original, if we were looking at it, it would say Pashouts. But they're foreigners, and they didn't know how to spell their names down in Bedford. But this is a picture of Fanny with her parents. We've got Joseph and Mary down there on the bottom. So proving Fanny is my grandmother through a match to her brother's family. So we only recently discovered this DNA match. So like a month or two ago, I didn't have this DNA match. So it came through very serendipitously for this program. This is from Ancestry, and this is showing that I have a DNA match to my great uncle Frank, who would be Fanny's brother, to his grandchild named Chris. And so Chris is showing up as my second cousin here. Now, I'm not familiar with this side of the family. I never met Uncle Frank. My dad tells a lot of nice stories about him, but he moved away and didn't come back to Indiana very frequently, and I never met him. And I never met these people either. But what I can say is that for a second cousin should share 75 to 360 centimorgans on average. And averaging that out, it should be around 224 centimorgans. Well, look how much I share with Chris, 233, almost smack dab on the average for a second cousin. So we share the appropriate amount of DNA to be second cousins. So this pretty much confirms that Frank is the brother of Fanny, and he's probably a full brother, meaning they share the same parents, Joseph and Mary. As far as we can tell, that's who they're with in the censuses. And so tentatively, we're saying that these are Fanny's parents, and we still haven't fully identified them. We would go back another generation to do that, which I'm not going to get to today. But yes, we have tentatively identified from this DNA match that Fanny's parents are Joseph and Mary, and Frank was her full brother. Okay, now we're going to move on to my maternal side. So we've got my mother. If you look at the chart down at the bottom right, we've got my mother, and we're looking at her father, Robert, who are Robert Mitchell's parents. And so on the family tree, we have them as John and Dolly. Dolly lived with my mother for years, so mom was very familiar with Dolly, her grandmother. But in this census here in 1930, we see Robert, my grandpa, with his parents, John and Dolly. And they are in Berry County, Michigan, which is where we expected them to be. And you can see here, it's a small family. And this is why we didn't have good DNA matches to this side of the family. This is Robert's marriage record, where he names his parents, as you can see at the bottom there. Father's name, John Martin Mitchell, mother's name, Dolly Graves. So this is Grandpa and his parents, John and Dolly. So DNA is going to be tricky here because Robert did not take a DNA test directly, as I said. His sisters and their children did not test. This is a low testing family. His parents, of course, John and Dolly, did not test. So we're going to have to go up another generation to John and Dolly's parents and trace descendants down to the present day to find DNA matches to these lines. And this is clearly indirect proof because I don't have direct DNA testing for any of these people. So up a generation, so here's Robert, right? We're trying to figure out who his parents are. Are they John and Dolly by DNA? We couldn't figure it out because we don't have any close DNA matches. We have to go up to John and Lucinda, who are John's parents, and William Robert and Mahalia, who are Dolly's parents. And this is, of course, on paper again. This is what our genealogy records tell us. Is the DNA going to prove out? And yes, it is. So we have up at the top of the screen here, we have John and Lucinda. And then we have my line coming down here through John Jr., Robert, Mom, and me. Well, it looks like great-grandpa John had a brother named Joseph, and we knew about him. I've seen genealogy records about him. And he had sons James and Gary, and they have descendants who have DNA tested, and they show up on my DNA match page. We have a Kathy and we have a Lynn. And they are supposed to be my third cousins once removed. Now, this side of the family, I don't know at all. They moved to California. We never met them. We never heard of them until we had these DNA matches. But as far as the amount of DNA shared, third cousin once removed, this is an appropriate amount of DNA. So we have no reason to think that these are half cousins. If we did, we could do some more investigating and see whether, Joseph and John were full brothers or half brothers. But at this point, we're going to say that we do have some DNA matches that come down from John and Lucinda through their other child. And so this tentatively proves that we are related, that Robert's father is John and John is the son of this John and Lucinda. We would want to have more DNA matches going up the tree, and we do have those. If I kept going, I could show those to you. The same thing we want to do with Dolly. Remember, we are still trying to figure out what's happening with Dolly. Dolly being my grandpa's mother. And her parents are William Robert and Cordelia Klein. Dolly had a known brother named Bola, and my mother knew him growing up. My grandfather knew him growing up, and we knew some of these people as well. We knew Woodrow and some of them. So this is not an unknown line to us. These are known cousins of ours, or we've heard of their family in that sort of way. And we have Mickey here and Stacy. They're supposed to be third cousins with me. And this is, again, an appropriate amount of DNA to share with a third cousin. You would go to DNA Painter and you'd look to see 45 centimorgans would be a third cousin, and it's almost exactly on the dot. So again, we have some DNA confirmation that Dolly and Bola are probably full siblings and that their parents were William Robert and Cordelia, meaning that Robert's mother is Dolly, basically. And you'd want to have more DNA matches up the tree, and we do. We're just not showing them today. So because I have found DNA matches to John and Lucinda, as well as to William Robert and Cordelia, to some other descendants of theirs, I'm saying that by DNA, Robert is my grandfather and that John and Dolly are his parents. All right, then we'll finally finish up with my grandma here. So we have down here at the bottom of the screen, we're looking at my mom's mother, Helen, and who were her parents. Well, on paper, we have Jason and Jesse. So this family is in 1930 census in Berry County, Michigan, exactly where they're supposed to be. We have the head, Jason, the wife, Jessie, and the children, including Helen, age 11. That would be my grandma. We also have on her marriage license that Helen says that her parents were Jason Willison and Jessie Lepper down at the bottom there. And this is my grandma pictured with her parents. And I am told that I resemble this side of the family. So when I turn my camera on, you guys can say yes or no. So here we have Jason and Jesse with our DNA matches. And this is also pretty much a slam dunk with these DNA matches. We have some great DNA matches. Of course, we were able to test Helen. So I share 1,899 centimorgans with her, which clearly makes her my grandmother, my mother's mother by DNA. We also had a sister of Helen that tested. This is Aunt Q over here. And she is testing as a great aunt with me, 847 centimorgans, which is exactly right for a great aunt. So this is proving that Q and Helen are sisters, full sisters, sharing the same parents. And then we also have another match here to great aunt Lucille. And I knew all of these women. I knew Q and I knew Lucille. And I know P and I know H. I've met them. This family has family reunions all the time. So I know who they are. And H is said to be my second cousin, sharing 195 centimorgans. And that is exactly, again, the right amount for a second cousin. So we have confirmed that Helen's parents are Jason and Jesse, and that these are three full sisters to each other through the DNA matches that we have to some of the descendants and so forth. This is all we really have time to do today. So we basically confirmed my own identity, who my parents are, that they are Donald and Anita, and who my four grandparents are. We also did some more extended work on John and Dolly because remember, we didn't have good DNA matches. So we had to go back to this further back generation and really confirm their identities as well by DNA. So you could keep going. And, you know, the next step would be going up here to David and proving who his parents were. Are they Jacob and Melinda or not? Who are Alice's parents? Are they George and Sarah or are they somebody else? And so forth. And so you would keep going through here and putting check marks on there or, you know, checking off as you go. It's going to get harder the farther back you go. And I kind of alluded to that earlier, but it's worthwhile. And like I said, I think I'd like to do a follow-up on this sometime and just kind of get back to some of these earlier relationships where the genealogical records are scarce and the DNA might be harder to interpret. With the exception of proving my connection to Robert, a lot of these other connections were pretty easy to make because I've tested so many family members and I have their DNA results to compare with. So occasionally you are going to have legitimate reasons where you won't have many matches to a particular side of your family. And, you know, a small family, I've had people come into the genealogy center and tell me that they're the only child of an only child. And so they would have no close relatives that they could even DNA test. They don't have any siblings. They don't have any aunts and uncles. So it's really no first cousins, really limited. So they would have to be using further back relatives to try to prove things. There are certain families that are averse to DNA testing, that maybe they have a suspicion about it. Somebody told me last night that her brother will not take a DNA test because he thinks China will get a hold of it. So, you know, people have different reasons why they are averse to doing DNA testing. And if you have a whole branch of your family that won't DNA test, it can prove difficult to get, you know, some matches to that side. If you're a recent immigrant to this country and your relatives are mostly in the old country, a lot of those countries around the world are not culturally doing DNA testing. So it would be difficult without recruiting some family members to test for you to get some good DNA matches. You might be part of a low testing population. Some ethnic groups, and this is a very broad statement to make, but some ethnic groups may be less likely to test. And some African Americans communities and Hispanic communities are not as likely to test as maybe the Caucasians would be testing. So this would be another reason why you don't have matches to certain sides of your family and you have to go back another couple generations to try to find some. So like I said, you would continue the work that I was doing there by continuing to go back by generation, looking for DNA matches, basically the same way that I did it. And I was doing it very slowly and methodically, but it's going to be harder to do the farther back in the tree you go. It takes more skill with your DNA analysis. So you want to practice on it. Practice makes perfect. And if you find a suspected misattributed parentage event, you might want to get help or a second opinion from a DNA expert to confirm your findings. Okay, I will stop sharing now and see if there are any questions.
Now, Sarah, I know you love to go through your own Q&A, which is fine. Somebody was having trouble finding the Q&A button, so I'm just going to ask you one quick question, and then you can go through them. Somebody asked, how can someone determine who their bio parents are if you were adopted at birth? So I think she's asking about getting a hold of the original birth certificate versus so explain
that. Okay. So basically, I think if the person is talking about getting a hold of their original birth certificate, it depends on where it was that this person was born. Every state in the United States has different rules about it. About half of the states have open adoption records right now, and about half of them don't. So it's really the luck of the draw where you were born, whether your state is one of those open states or closed states or partially open states. So every state's a little different. You'd want to look that up under the state vital records office is usually where you would look on a website. You want to be sure you're on the official state vital records website, and there should be a section under adoption records, and it will tell you exactly what you need to do and what records you're available to you as the adopted person. Canada, same way. Some of the provinces have different rules and so forth. You know, foreign countries, adopted from a foreign country, again, different rules for each country. So you want to look into all of that. There are, as far as DNA wise, figuring out who your adopted family or who your biological family is through looking at your DNA. I've done several presentations on that. They're on the library's YouTube channel. So you might want to go and refresh some of those and look at those and see if they help you with that process. So I hope I answered that question. Okay. Okay, so Myra is asking, what does the green bar with evaluate mean on the family tree diagram? I think that was a feature of Ancestry's website, and it doesn't really mean anything to the purposes of this talk. I think it was a feature on Ancestry DNA. So send us an email if I didn't answer that question, Myra. Judy, if the genealogical tree for fourth great grandfather is supported by DNA matches on multiple lines, are there additional steps to confirm the relationships? So this is where it starts getting a little hair raising, and I would like to do another program on this sometime, Judy, but I think your statement that there are DNA matches on multiple lines is good. You want to have matches, like if your fourth great grandfather had 10 siblings, if you have DNA matches to, 7 or 8 of those siblings, descendants, that's pretty good evidence that you are related to that family somehow at least. And you want to look at the centimorgans shared just to be sure that it's not too high or too low for the proposed relationship. And if nothing gives you really red flags, then you'd want to search for the genealogical records that also prove this. So if you have a way to verify connections, genealogically speaking, that back up your DNA evidence, that would be another step. But yeah, you're on the right track, I think, Judy. Lisa, how do you see others' DNA results on different platforms than Ancestry? Well, I'm not sure if I quite understand your question, but you would have to test at the other platforms. So there's the 4 major testing companies that are Ancestry, which is mostly what I showed today. Family Tree DNA, they have a Family Finder test, MyHeritage, and 23andMe. And once you get your results back, you can see your list of matches, just like we did today with Ancestry. If you test, you can always see the shared matches between you and a match, and that can help you kind of figure out what side of your family this match might be coming from based on the shared matching. All 4 companies allow you to do that. And if you're talking about like seeing other relatives, you'd have to have their passwords basically in some of the other sites. Like in order to see somebody else's 23andMe results, they'd have to give you their password and their login. There's not a way to share the access. Ancestry and MyHeritage allow you to share your DNA results with another member. So there's a way to share your DNA results with other people on Ancestry and also on MyHeritage. There's not with the other companies. So hopefully that answered the question, or send us an email and I'll try to figure out, more what you were asking in an email. Charles says, have you utilized the various ancestor surname projects available on Family Tree DNA in your research? How have those projects contributed to verifying or disproving genealogical connections? So the surname projects at Family Tree DNA are mostly geared towards male line tests, which is the Y chromosome test. And I have used those tests, but being a female, I'm not able to take a Y chromosome test myself. I have to get a male family member to take them for me. So I've tested my father and I've tested my maternal uncle, and I have their results. And those have helped me a great deal get back on the surname line of my dad, which is Allen, and my uncle, which is Mitchell. So yes, those are helpful. And I didn't you know, I wasn't really talking about Y-DNA today, but I have done, there are some programs, again, on our YouTube channel that I have done before on Y-DNA. GEDmatch has a lot of tools. This is more for a more advanced researcher. But yes, GEDmatch has a lot of tools for analyzing your DNA, your autosomal DNA, and finding matches and analyzing how you match them, like on what exact part of the chromosome you match them on. And some of the advanced people are doing that. They're trying to map out where on the chromosome the match is happening. And so you can do that on GEDmatch. I don't particularly use those tools because I find I could spend all of my time working on I have like 80,000 matches on Ancestry DNA alone. And so I have not, as you can imagine, I have not yet looked at all those 80,000 matches. So I'm still kind of like working on that angle, and I haven't really utilized the GEDmatch as much, but it is there and it has a lot of good tools for advanced DNA analysis. You are right. Cliff says, did you grow up in the Bedford area? No, my dad grew up in Bedford. So, yes. Catherine says, I have found no documentary evidence of my second great grandmother's mother in 45 years of searching. Ooh, she has some cousin matches to descendants of the possible mother's second marriage. How confident can I be that I have found her mother? That is tricky because that is far back and you'd want to do a number of double checks to make sure that you are on the right track. I would say if you want me to kind of look over your work and give you my impression of where you are and give you maybe some hints or some clues, I can do that. Send us an email. But yeah, that is like 4 or 5 half fourth cousin matches. This is starting to get pretty far back and you're probably sharing a very little amount of DNA with those people. And so you just want to be sure that you are on the right track and not barking up the wrong tree. So like I said, I'd be happy to look at it if you'd like me to. Lisa says, how do you find a DNA expert? There are a number of depending on what your question is and where you are stuck, there are a number of Facebook groups. So if you do Facebook, you might consider joining a Facebook group for DNA. There's DNA detectives and DNA detectives or DD Social, which is more of like a chat group about DNA. Those are both very reputable groups, and you might be able to get somebody that would volunteer to help you or look over your work on one of those sites. There are people like Diane Southard. She has a website where you can, and you would pay her. It's a paid service. I think she does like an hour consultation that's paid where you would submit your question to her in advance and she would work with you for an hour and give you some insight on what she thinks is going on. So you'd want to look at her website. I believe it's called Your DNA Guide is her website, and her name is Diane Southard. So that would be another instance of what you could, where you could find an expert. All right, I think we are done with the questions. If there are no more, I think we will end this program. So, Elizabeth, are you there?
Yes, I thought you were going to say goodbye. Well.
Oh, yeah, I am saying goodbye, but I realized that I don't have a button to end the program, so you have to do it. So thank you everyone for coming.